The Federal Reserve's Federal Open Market Committee meeting started today, and this is going to be the first meeting that Kevin Warsh has been over as the new chairman of the Federal Reserve. Now, Kevin Warsh comes in to replace Jerome Powell, whom Jerome Powell was put into the position by Donald Trump during his first administration. And I always kind of thought that Donald Trump unfairly, attacked and pressured Jerome Powell because one of the things when candidate Trump back in 2016 was campaigning on was he was talking about how Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve was being very political in their decisions to keep rates at near zero during the Obama administration. And Trump called that out. If you remember, this goes back to the Trump-Clinton debate from 2016.
We have the worst revival of an economy since the Great Depression. And believe me, we're in a bubble right now. And the only thing that looks good is the stock market. But if you raise interest rates even a little bit, that's going to come crashing down. We are in a big, fat, ugly bubble. And we better be awfully careful. And we have a Fed that's doing political things. This Janet Yellen of the Fed is doing political by keeping the interest rates at this level.
And I remember seeing that at the time and thinking like, wow, Donald Trump's talking about some real stuff here. And it kind of, it's one of the reasons that I supported him in 2016. But then as soon as he came into office, nothing really changed. He increased the deficit spending. And then when Jerome Powell was trying to increase rates, even during Trump's first administration, he attacked Powell. And clearly Trump understands, the effects of having those low interest rates. And so when Powell was trying to normalize those during Trump's first administration, Trump attacked him. And then, of course, we all saw the inflation that unfolded. And, of course, a lot of that had to do with the spending in the CARES Act. But a lot of that inflation that happened was because of Trump's first administration. And not that Biden really did anything to help us from the inflation problem. But, Donald Trump deserves a lot of that blame. So this is going to be Kevin Warsh's first time overseeing one of these meetings, and a lot of the people expect the Fed to hold their rates steady, which it's currently in the range of 3.5 to 3.75%. Now, if you look at what the CPI was last month, it was at a 3-year high at 4.2%. So, really, if they don't raise their rates, it's kind of like a de facto rate cut. I mean, there you have a real negative rate. You know what I mean? Like, yes, nominally 3.5 to 3.75 it's a positive, but it's actually going to be negative if you look at inflation as being in excess of those rates. Now, of course, the Fed doesn't go off CPI. They go off of the core PCE, and that's another one of the things that Kevin Warsh wants to change. He actually doesn't even want to use the core PCE number. He wants to use a trimmed mean measurement that actually shows even lower inflation than the core PCE does, which and I've talked about this before. The Fed and the government like to underreport inflation because for the Federal Reserve, it gives them more flexibility when it comes to their, rate policy and things like that, because if inflation's low, then they can obviously cut rates more freely. And for the government, they want lower rates because that helps them with their payments and everything that's going to be based on inflation adjustments, Social Security, tips, other things like that. But so Kevin Warsh has said that he wants to lower rates over time from where they're currently at, which is kind of strange because the federal funds rate actually has a historical average of about 5%. So why we would need to cut from 3.5 is, that's questionable, especially when Trump says that we have a great economy, when unemployment is down. So why would we want to lower rates over time? The whole point of lowering rates is to stimulate the economy. But if the economy is supposed to be booming, as Trump claims, and if unemployment is low, then we shouldn't need to cut rates. And another thing that Warsh has talked about is he wants to reduce the Fed's balance sheet. He says he wants to go back to a footprint of the Fed's balance sheet around 2010, which was approximately $2.3 trillion. Currently, the Fed's balance sheet is sitting at about $6.73 trillion. And that's a significant reduction if he wants to do that, and it's going to be difficult as well, considering the amount of money that the government is trying to borrow and having to roll over, and that's going to put pressure, especially with inflation still being up. That's going to put pressure on treasury bonds and investors because they're going to demand a higher rate of interest on their bonds. So if they want to keep those, if they want to keep the yields down on the treasuries, then the Fed's more than likely going to have to come in and do some type of quantitative easing or some other kind of program. So, like, trying to reduce their balance sheet is going to be difficult. And the fact that the Fed hasn't been able to reduce their balance sheet or even, remain at those 2010 levels is further evidence that the quantitative easing program that Bernanke introduced was a complete failure. When people were critical of Bernanke and saying that that policy was essentially debt monetization, Bernanke said no, and the proof was that it was a temporary program and they were going to reduce their holdings of the treasuries as soon as the program was completed. Well, since that program, the balance sheet has done nothing but expand and get larger. So that's further evidence that QE during Obama's administration was a failure. But either way, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, given that this is Kevin Warsh's first meeting as the new chairman of the Federal Reserve. So we'll just have to see what happens. The announcement will come out tomorrow afternoon, and then he'll have his first press conference as chairman of the Federal Reserve. So we'll just keep all eyes on Kevin Warsh right now. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment.